I'd like to welcome everybody to a cool, rainy Minnesota afternoon here on the 17th of June. We get a great topic coming up. It's muskie season's just getting started. The rivers are flowing good and the fishing's been good from what I've heard. I haven't been out too much yet this year, but welcome everybody to our 239th episode. Joining us today is Kamden Glade. He's one of our fisheries research scientists out of our Grand Rapids office, and he's going to talk to us about muskies in Minnesota today. Kamden, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Benji. As he mentioned, I'm a fisheries research scientist based out of Grand Rapids. Been in this role for a little while now, and my primary responsibilities are conducting research related to muskie and northern pike. So today I'll be sharing a little bit of an overview of our recently completed new long-range plan for Muskellunge through 2040, as well as some current research related to that plan and future directions. So first, we want to kind of define what is a long-range plan. These are overarching plans that provide really broad direction to management actions over a relatively long time frame. So in this case, about 15 years. This document gives us a vision for the future and lays out where we want to go. It's very different than an operational plan or a lake-specific management plan that breaks things down into actionable steps, which is more of the how to get there. This is the fourth long-range plan for Muskellunge in DNR history. The first two were part of larger planning efforts that included all fish species. In 1987, the focus was on genetics. This was about the time that Leech Lake strain muskies were starting to be reared and stocked in lakes throughout the state. By 1994, the focus was on continued genetics and new regulations to promote trophy potential. By 2008, the muskie plan was only combined with large pike instead of all other species, and the focus was to add new waters to increase angling opportunities throughout the state. The new plan is the first that focuses solely on muskies, and the primary focus is on improving existing populations. We'll get into the details of what that means in just a bit. First, a little bit of background on how we got to this point. We started with a public scoping survey that ran for about 6 weeks during the spring of 2024. That survey got over 4,000 responses, which is really just an incredible amount of responses on something like this. And we really want to thank our internal muskie tech team, tribal partners, elusive work group, and muskie anglers throughout the region that really helped spread the word on this effort and shared widely so that we could get a lot of really good feedback from people that had an interest in muskie management throughout the state. We further developed draft key objectives, and we did that early on, which brought great opportunity to connect both internally and externally on topics and new potential directions. And we were able to have regular discussions with various staff and external partners to modify and shape things as we went. We also made a concerted effort to raise awareness of this process from the very beginning, and we brought initial ideas to public presentations and worked with different media outlets to spread the word. As we got feedback on ideas and initial objectives, members of the internal muskie tech team drafted the document and distributed for internal and public review. Because of the effort made to gather input and raise awareness from the very beginning, comments at this stage were pretty minimal, and we were able to get the final draft approved and officially released to the public in mid-April. If you sign up for DNR email updates, you probably saw this announcement around the time it was released, as well as right around fishing opener, and again, recently as muskie season opened up. So what does this plan contain? It's got some really good information, background, and summaries of various research projects, but the key components are the goals, objectives, and strategies. The goals are long-term, outcome-oriented purpose statements that support ongoing efforts to sustain a successful muskie management program throughout the state. Each goal contains trackable objectives, and each objective has actionable strategies that describe how we will achieve goals and objectives. We'll run through each goal and hit on some of the objectives next, and I'll highlight some of the steps that we're already taking to make progress toward the goals. Goal number one is to maintain muskie populations for high quality angling opportunities through sustainable management. As mentioned previously, there was overwhelming support for improving existing fisheries, and one of the key objectives that support this goal will be to increase the survival of stocked fish. There's lots of evidence both in Minnesota and in surrounding states, that bigger fish have better survival. So what we're talking about here is a shift in the focus of our production and stocking efforts from fall fingerlings, which have been the primary product for the last number of years, to fall yearlings, sorry, which gives us an additional year of growth. Part of the reasoning behind this is what we call the fall fingerling ceiling. Because of the climate in Minnesota and our reliance on outdoor rearing ponds, we've struggled to consistently raise fish that are bigger than 10 inches within one growing season. Holding on to these fish for an additional year will increase their size at stocking, and preliminary research in several Minnesota lakes shows these fish survive around 5 times more than fall fingerlings. So based on this finding, the plan is to stock yearlings at a 5-to-1 ratio, so 1 yearling for every 5 fingerlings as they're available. As we increase our capacity to raise these yearling fish, the goal is to spread these fish out among our stocked waters. This should allow us to give a boost to a variety of different fisheries in the near term, while also allowing us to evaluate different stocking strategies in lots of different lake types. Part of that evaluation will include monitoring with pit tags. These are small internal tags that are the same as a microchip that you'd put in a dog or a cat. It allows us to track survival of individual fish and inform decisions going forward. It's also important to note that fall fingerlings aren't going away. They still seem to work well in some lakes, and there are substantially fewer logistical challenges when we don't need to keep fish alive through the winter and an additional growing season. We also anticipate that it will take a while for us to build up our capacity to consistently produce a large number of yearlings as we work through some of these logistical hurdles. That said, we're excited that we were able to stock nearly 4,000 yearlings into 24 different lakes in 2025. This was a huge first step with this new plan and gives us great momentum going forward because with the 5-to-1 ratio I mentioned earlier, that allowed us to hold on to a bunch of fingerlings for yearling production in 2026. Part of managing for trophy angling opportunities is ensuring mortality rates of these fish remain low. We're already doing that with our current size restrictions and seasonal closures, but another theme that came out in public comments was concerns related to fishing pressure and survival in the era of rapid advances in fishing technology. To that end, we'll have focused efforts on education and outreach to promote ethical angling practices that reduce the risk of catch and release mortality, and we'll collaborate on research projects studying how technology might influence catch rates, fish behavior, and muskie populations. Ongoing examples of such research include the Leech Lake Survival and Telemetry Study in partnership with Bemidji State University, Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, and Minfish, and an upcoming study directly investigating the effects of live imaging sonar on various fish populations, including muskies, being led by the University of Minnesota. Through the scoping survey and public engagement, anglers specifically requested an increased focus on the 3 largest stocked fisheries in the state, being Mille Lacs Lake, Lake Minnetonka, and Lake Vermilion. Specific strategies for these lakes vary and depend on their lake-specific management plans. For Mille Lacs, we're excited to continue working with tribal partners in stocking yearling muskies going forward. For Minnetonka, that means prioritizing yearlings to fulfill the stocking quota each year. And on Vermilion, we'll continue following the current management plan by stocking 3,000 fingerlings every year with an option for surplus when they're available for the next couple of years. Coming up in 2027 and 28, we're planning to conduct a population estimate on Lake Vermilion, and we'll use the results of that population estimate to evaluate stocking rates and life stages at that point. There was overwhelming support for improving existing populations, and we can do this through additional research and monitoring to identify underperforming populations and increasing recruitment. A key strategy here will be the continued use of pit tags to monitor populations through time. Last year, I was able to purchase some pit tag scanners, a specific piece of equipment that you use to identify the tags inside these muskies, with funds from a Hugh Becker grant through Muskies Inc. to start a project working with anglers to check fish for tags and start learning more about the population on Lake Vermilion. The long-term goal of this project is to determine if and how we can incorporate angler data into our standard sampling. If you'd like more information on this project, you can see the link that Cassie dropped in the chat. There's a similar project going on Leech Lake, but since that population isn't stocked and very few fish have pit tags, the methods are a bit different. Instead of checking for a pit tag, anglers are taking a small fin clip that's sent to a lab for genetic identification, like taking an individual genetic fingerprint from the fish. Then, if a fin clip from the same fish is submitted again in the future, researchers will know it's the same fish. This allows us to conduct a mark recapture study based on fish DNA rather than any sort of internal or external tag. Finally, the last objective of the goal was to hire an associate biologist to specifically focus on muskie and northern pike throughout the state. So that's me. I've been in that role since September after almost 3 field seasons as a fisheries specialist in Tower, and I'm excited to continue working with research and management staff on the priorities outlined in this plan. Goal 2 is entirely focused on stocking, and the underlying theme here is again a shift towards yearlings. I briefly mentioned earlier that there are additional challenges when keeping these fish alive for an additional year, and we certainly expect some challenges and learning opportunities as we go. One possible way to raise these fish an additional year will be through expanding the use of natural ponds. I highlighted earlier that we were able to stock nearly 4,000 yearlings in 2025. Most of those fish came from natural ponds rather than the drainable ponds that we've tended to rely on for fingerling production. Because of the success we saw with those ponds, we're looking for opportunities to expand the use of natural ponds going forward. That said, not all ponds are created equal, and there could be a few busts as we learn the right recipe. I also want to call out the investment in infrastructure. This is a broad objective with lots of facilities around the state getting some updates or needed repairs, but the biggest investment will be the new hatchery in Waterville. They're finishing up the design phase and getting construction permits finalized, but we're really excited for the additional capacity that this new facility will provide. As a teaser, here's a mock-up of what the design could look like when it's all said and done. Goal 3 focuses on hybrid muskies, also known as tiger muskie, in select lakes within the Twin Cities metro area. We'll continue stocking and managing 10 existing lakes, but also heard from several people through this process that there was interest in expanding hybrid muskie management. While the primary focus of this plan is to focus on existing populations, there could be opportunities down the road to work with external partners to purchase hybrid fingerlings. Another key objective for hybrid populations will be developing sampling methods to assess populations and angler use. Traditional muskie sampling relies on spawning behavior in the spring, and that doesn't necessarily apply to these sterile hybrids. And because these populations exist primarily in smaller water bodies that aren't suitable for pure strain muskies, we don't generally have good creel survey information to see if anglers are targeting and catching these fish. Finally, the last objective is to improve outreach and education efforts centered on the role that muskellunge play in fish communities. There's been extensive research in Minnesota over the next couple of years that help inform this long-range plan, and I'd like to highlight some of that right now for you all. First up is 2 related studies that looked at how other fish species responded to muskie stocking. The first paper compared catch data for other species before and after muskie stocking and found that no species had a consistent decline following stocking. A follow-up study compared stocked lakes to reference lakes with similar physical and biological attributes and again showed that muskie stocking did not have a negative impact on other fish populations, with possible exception of reducing white sucker populations in some lakes. If you're interested in this research, there should be a link in the chat that will bring you to the research study. Next was a study on Elk Lake that used ratios of carbon and nitrogen in fish tissues to look at diet patterns and niche overlap of muskie, northern pike, and walleye. The 3 predators had relatively low niche overlap in this study, and you can see why when looking at the estimated diet proportions. Muskie tended to eat more Cisco, that's TLC, and white sucker, WTS, while walleye relied almost exclusively on other prey fish. Contrasting that, northern pike consumed a combination of prey fish and invertebrates. One downside to this type of work is that it's almost impossible to determine what sorts of fish fall into the other prey fish category. So to determine what sorts of fish those might be and to get a better handle on diet patterns in more lakes throughout the state, DNR started a project with Bemidji State University, and this is where I was a graduate student leading this research. In this study, we flushed the stomachs of muskie, northern pike, walleye, and largemouth bass to determine what they were eating. This allows us to get really detailed information of what these fish are eating at any given time, while still allowing us to release these large fish that we're managing intensively throughout the state back into the water. In this study, we found that muskie had a really broad diet and consumed a lot of different prey, as you can see on the left-hand side of this figure. Northern pike and walleye really focused on perch and panfish. Those are the orange and red bars in that figure in the two center columns. And largemouth bass ate lots of crayfish and other invertebrates. That's the pink and kind of teal color on the right-hand side. Walleye were also very rare to find in stomachs, not just for muskies, but for all predators. They made up less than 1% of the diet for each species. In fact, when we were looking at muskies specifically, they were more likely to eat a bird, like the coot pictured on the left, or a mammal like the muskrat pictured on the right, than they were to eat a walleye. And because muskies consumed such a variety of different prey species, they were also able to consume a wide range of prey sizes. While prey size was generally larger for bigger muskies, there was still a big range of sizes from just an inch or two, small darters and yellow perch, all the way up to 25 inches, those being larger suckers and an occasional northern pike. For those of you looking to catch a muskie this season, these last two figures can give you a little bit of useful information. The broad range of prey types and sizes consumed by muskies means anglers have a chance to catch one with just about anything, including incidental catches while targeting other species. If you're targeting muskie specifically, lures ranging from small spinner baits to large rubber baits will all work. However, one thing to keep in mind is what types of prey are available in a given lake and where they might be located throughout the year. This time of year, you can often find large concentrations of sunfish in the shallows as they prepare to spawn and defend their nests. Lures like quick-moving spinners, pictured on the left, topwaters in the center, and floating jerkbaits, pictured on the right, can all work well in that kind of habitat. In more northern lakes where muskies might feed on cisco or suckers, bigger crankbaits or rubber lures might be worth a shot. In many lakes, the dominant prey species were simply the most abundant species in the preferred size range. You can use DNR Lake Finder to see recent survey results for your favorite lake to see what the top species are and use that knowledge to select lures and locations. One example here is from Bald Eagle Lake, which was one of the diet study lakes. I highlighted some of the more abundant species from a fish survey, primarily panfish, perch, and northern pike. All three of these groups were well represented in the diets of muskies from this lake. So this is a strategy you can use to inform your fishing choices on your favorite lake as well. No matter what lures you plan to use, make sure you're prepared to safely handle and release a muskellunge when you catch it. A large landing net is a must to scoop these big fish and can double as a live well to keep the fish in the water while you get it unhooked and prepare to take a picture. You also want to make sure you have release tools to help you unhook the fish quickly while keeping yourself safe as well. Long nose pliers or some sort of hook grabber, pictured second from the left in this picture, help keep your fingers away from sharp teeth. Jaw spreaders and hook cutters can also be helpful if the fish is hooked deeply, and the hook cutters can be an added safety measure if you happen to get hooked as well. Fish have a protective slime layer that protects against injuries and infections, and it's important to protect that while measuring your fish. Try to use a nice big measuring board to keep the fish off the ground or the carpet of your boat, and it's a good idea to get that board wet before you measure the fish as an extra precaution. And if you're going to spend lots of time fishing on stocked lakes, I'd really encourage you to add a pit tag reader to your box of release tools. These are available on a lot of different sites, including Amazon, for about the price of a typical muskie lure, about $35. The information you provide us helps improve our stocking and management strategies, and you can get some pretty interesting information from that as well. All right, back to the research. Because muskie ate such a broad range of prey, they had low diet overlap with the other three predators. Bass also had low overlap with walleye and pike because, as I mentioned, they ate so many crayfish and invertebrates. Pike and walleye were the only pair that exhibited high diet overlap. And again, this is because they both consumed primarily perch and sunfish in most lakes. However, it's important to note that diet overlap does not necessarily mean that these species are competing for food, as there's often plenty of small perch and sunfish to go around in many of the lakes that we studied. Finally, we paired the diet data from that previous study with population estimates for all 4 species in 3 lakes throughout the state. Population estimates followed a consistent pattern across lakes, with bass and northern pike always being more abundant than walleye or muskie. Overall consumption, or the total weight of all food eaten by each population over the course of a year, followed a similar pattern. And that's what's pictured here in this graph. This is because even though an individual adult muskie consumes much more food than an individual of the other species over the course of a year, there are so many fewer muskies that the population as a whole consumes less than the other species. Thank you all for tuning in today to learn more about the new Muskie Long Range Plan. If you want more details, you can read the entire document by scanning the QR code on this slide, or you can find it online at mndnr.gov/muskie, where you can also find additional information on muskie management, biology, some of the research I talked through, and some angling opportunities throughout the state. With that, I'll be happy to try and answer any questions.
Thanks, Kamden, for that very informative talk. It was interesting. I am on a personal mission to get out and catch a muskie on a fly rod this year, so I'm lacking in effort so far, but I'm hoping this this fall when they start feeding, I'll have a little more time to get out and try that. So we don't have any questions. If anybody is wants to ask a question, please put that in again. 3 little dots down the bottom right-hand corner, the Slido function there, Q&A. Open that up and put your questions in there. Looks like I got one. Here, does a pit reader automatically send information to you, or should anglers report this information somewhere?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background on the pit tag reader. These are or pit tags in general, these are pretty unique little pieces of technology. They don't actually contain a battery, which is really nice, especially when we're talking about muskies who can live for, upwards of 20 years in some of our northern lakes. So we don't have to worry about that tag dying at any point. Um, and they're activated by that scanner. So the only way that anybody will ever know if that fish has a tag in it or not is if they use that scanner. The scanners don't automatically send information anywhere. Some of the models that you can get do have Bluetooth connectivity that will send the number directly to your phone if you're interested in that. What I generally encourage people to do is, since you're going to be taking a picture of the fish anyway, have your phone or your camera, whichever you're going to use, out and ready to go right before you take that fish out of the net to measure and take a picture. Scan that fish and take a picture of the tag number if there is one. That way you don't have to worry about writing it down, saving it, making sure that the scanner you have has internal memory. You can go back and find that number later, and then you do need to report that. We did put the link to the DNR tagged fish reporting website in the chat. You can definitely report tags there. You can also send emails directly to the local biologists for the lake you happen to be fishing.
Corey had a similar question about the pit readers. He was wondering about purchasing one if you buy one off of Amazon or something, if you had a link for that. Corey's an avid angler. There might be, I hear people all the time, they're catching tag fish out there. So
Yeah,
yes.
I don't have a link handy right now. If you're interested, you can certainly send me an email and I can direct you to a couple different models that I've got experience with. Otherwise, if you just go straight to Amazon and search for, you can search for pit tag scanner. A lot of times they'll be referred to as an RFID tag scanner. Um, there's different models on there. Most of them should work with the types of tags that we're working with. But if you have specific questions or want more detailed recommendations, definitely shoot me an email and I'll try to point you in the right direction.
And if you didn't catch Kamden's email there, we can throw that in the chat, or you can reach out to me too on the website. And also there's a question about a link to view this webinar later. Again, you can find all these in our archives here at mndnr.gov/discover. Mid next week, it'll be posted. Otherwise, visit the DNR YouTube channel, and I'll have it up there probably later today. So Gary's asking, is there any disease or parasites that are common in muskies?
Um, when they're in a hatchery setting, there's a few different ones that we worry about. Once they get out into the lakes, not nearly as much. One disease that has affected muskie populations, not in Minnesota, but in some of the Great Lakes, was VHS, or viral hemorrhagic septicemia. Um, that really did a number on muskie populations, especially in some of the eastern Great Lakes, Lake St. Clair, the St. Lawrence River, some of those populations, even Green Bay to a lesser extent. Um, that has seemed to run its course about 20 years or so ago. Still definitely a concern, but not nearly as prevalent as it was then. But that's not ever been detected in muskie populations in inland Minnesota lakes.
We got a fishing question for you. I've never used one of these, but I've heard really good things about them. What are your thoughts on using a muskie cradle versus a muskie net?
I think a cradle can be a really good option, especially if you have multiple people. I tend to fish by myself quite a bit, so the logistics of trying to handle a cradle that has kind of two separate handles to it, as opposed to a big net with one handle, can be a little challenging while you're trying to do everything on your own. But that can definitely work. You just want to make sure that you're keeping your hands away from the hooks as much as possible as that fish is coming in, because worst case scenario is you have a really large muskie that's still attached to a lure that's now also attached to you, and trying to scramble to figure out how to get break that connection. So just extra caution there, since you will be down closer to the water.
Another user or viewer will create information. Camden, on his local lake, French, which is French Lake, the DNR was handing out scanners um, to those targeting muskies in the fall, and he was wondering if that would continue this year.
I would have to double check with the guys down in the Waterville office. I'm not entirely sure what their plan is, but I know there's several offices throughout the state that have purchased a couple pit tag readers. Generally, they're reaching out to either local guides or dedicated muskie anglers that they've had previous connections with to help facilitate some of that data collection. So if you're down in the French Lake area and you're interested, I would definitely suggest reaching out to the folks at the Waterville Fisheries office and see if that's an option for you.
All right, we got a question on the rearing pond at Clearwater Lake in Beltrami County. It was rebuilt over the last year, and the question is, why was this pond rebuilt? Are you still planning on raising the yearling class of muskies like the last few years, or is something else being raised in that pond? And what lakes have been stocked from this pond? I did want to point out that that pond was rebuilt just to improve the pond conditions, drainage structure, and the dike stabilization there through bonding money that was allocated for the fisheries infrastructure improvement. They get out more funds, I believe. So I don't know if you want to comment to what's being raised there now and what lakes have been stocked from there.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the plan is long term for the Clearwater Pond. My understanding is that that is a drainable pond, and so I'm not sure that there's really a good opportunity to hold fish over winter in those types of structures, just because the outlet structures that they all have, once you start dealing with freezing water and ice in the winter, you can end up with some pretty significant damage to those structures over the winter. But bigger picture, yes, the goal is to raise these fish to yearlings more and more in the coming years. And generally speaking, these fish will get stocked into lakes that are within the same general area of the ponds where they live. So for Clearwater Pond over by Bemidji, you're going to be talking about lakes in the Bemidji area. They might send some down to like Detroit Lakes or over to Park Rapids, and some of the lakes in those areas is generally going to be where those fish go.
We have a question about different strains. Can you speak to the different strains of muskies, or are you using all Leech Lake strain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at this point, we are using entirely Leech Lake strain for our management and stocking efforts in the state. Historically, we've tried some different strains. Initially, going back to I think the 50s or the 60s, we were using Shoepack Lake strain. That's a unique strain that lives on some of the or in two of the interior lakes in Voyageurs National Park. These fish tend to live at higher density and reach not nearly as large of size as the Leech Lake strain. So going back historically to about the early to mid 80s, we heard from anglers that there was a desire for some larger size muskies than we were producing and growing with those shoepack strains. So there are still some shoepack strain remnants out there. There's a few lakes in the state where they took hold and they're now naturally reproducing. We're not actively stocking any of those lakes, but there are still some shoepack strain lakes not inside the national park that you can definitely check out. Those are great options if you're not necessarily interested in the size of the muskie that you catch, but you want to kind of dip your toes into muskie fishing, have really good chance at encountering multiple fish in a good fishing day, just because they do live at such higher densities. So your odds of contacting fish, whether that's follows or bites or actually putting fish in the net, are quite a bit higher.
Everybody's going to go back and watch this last 5 minutes of this webinar just for those lakes again. You got to map out their summer plans. So if you want to, Kamden, you can take your presentation down there. I think
Okay.
everybody got a chance to get that QR code. Somebody else was asking, do most Minnesota lakes have muskie populations across the state, or is there a list of muskie lakes that you kind of concentrate stocking and stuff on?
Yep. So we have a list of managed musky waters in that long range plan that you can access. I think the total number of lakes throughout the state is just over 100. So a relatively small number of lakes relative to the managed waters that we have in the state. That said, it does tend to be larger lakes. So the total surface area of the lakes with muskies is quite a bit higher proportionally than the number of lakes.
We have a few more questions on the Clearwater Pond. Yeah, it's an overwintering pond. I think we already answered most of those though. Another one on how long has muskie stocking been taking place on Mille Lacs?
Oh, that's a good question. I want to say that was one of the initial Leech Lake strain lakes, and there might have been a couple stockings of different strains too. So I'm fairly certain it was sometime in the mid to early 80s when that started, um, and it's been relatively consistent since then. There was a period of time in a lot of those initial stocked lakes where stocking numbers really went down. The idea initially was that once we stocked these fish into lakes that we identified as good candidates for muskies, that there would be some natural reproduction and we'd be able to decrease stocking numbers and frequency on some of these lakes. Turns out that that probably isn't happening on a lot of lakes. There's certainly some exceptions to that, but seems like consistent stocking is a key to sustaining these stocked fisheries.
Deal. There's another question. I was just looking at the long range plan here to see if I could find it. I to put a link in and I didn't find it yet, but is there a map showing the 102 lakes with muskies? In which part of the state are most of these lakes?
They're fairly spread out. Definitely fewer in the southern part of the state, but once you get to about the I-95 corridor through the state and going north, there's pretty good geographic coverage going all the way up until you get the far northern reaches of the state. I don't know for sure if there is a map out there or not, but in the long range plan towards the back, there's definitely a list of lakes. Um, so you could use that list, plug it into Lake Finder or Google Maps or whatever your preferred mapping software is, and see where stuff is laid out across the state.
That's a great idea. I'm glad you mentioned Lake Finder because it is, I think, one of the least or most underused resources we have on our website for people that are getting out there fishing. So you made a great reference to that. So thanks for calling that out. Well, here's a personal one. They're not going to ask you exactly where you caught this fish, but they want to know what the biggest muskie you've caught is. Maybe there's a difference between you fishing and
Right.
you working. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'll say the biggest one I've caught personally is 46.5 inches. And the biggest one I caught working was almost 55 inches. We couldn't quite get it to touch 55 on the measuring board, but it was about as close as you can get without the tail touching 55.
Well, that's a big fish.
It was a big fish in the spring, so it still had some eggs in its belly too, and it was a really impressive fish.
Well, I think that's all we had for questions in there. If anybody wants to throw anything else in there, please do that quick, and we'll see if we can get to that. I just want to. Minnesota's pretty cool. I spent a lot of time out in Colorado, and we were not real big into these toothy critters like pike and muskies and whatnot out there. Um, so I have a lot of friends that were fly anglers and trout anglers out west that love to come to Minnesota and catch these. Just they think they're giants. And we have them. It's just a common thing in Minnesota. It's a pretty cool. We have such a great fisheries in Minnesota. It's just phenomenal. So I say that all the time, and it's true that we have some of the best fishing, I think, in the country here from trout to muskies. So, uh, Kamden, thanks so much for joining us today, sharing your passion and knowledge about muskies across the state. Hopefully, everybody will get a chance to get out there this summer and try the elusive fish of 1,000 cast. They keep saying so. I have not made my 1,000 cast yet, but hopefully I'll work on that this summer. And I'd like to welcome everybody too for our 240th episode here coming up the 1st of July, just before 4th of July season, surveying fish in the BWCA. So if you're looking for fishing tips, how we do some of that survey work in the Boundary Waters area, tune in here in a couple weeks, and Brent Flatten is going to join us to talk about how we do the surveys and probably give some tips and tricks on catching a few meals of fish while you're up there in the Boundary Waters. So I don't see any other questions. I think with that, everybody get outside, take somebody new outdoors with you, enjoy all we have to offer here in Minnesota, and stay safe out there. And hopefully we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.